So there's I assume a delay on LinkedIn.
One more thing. All right, let's bring our friends in from Zoom.
Awesome.
Hello, everyone. We have people connecting in, logging in from all over the place, coming in on Zoom, and we're pushing out to LinkedIn and out to YouTube. So as folks settle in, we'd ask you guys just to take a look at what we've got up here. What does the phrase joy at work mean to you? And if you'd like to share that with us, we would love to hear what you have to say. But we thought maybe we would tell you how we're thinking about it. So Roxanne, when you hear that phrase, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I can tell you that I have been experiencing a lot of joy lately. I've noticed because I'm focusing on something, and right now focusing a lot on redesigning our website to be a really joyful experience. And so the idea of that is immersive, and that has been really satisfying. So that's what bringing joy work means to me right now. So I think it's something like this third one down, getting lost in the work I do.
Yeah, I think the getting lost one, it totally makes sense to me. I've had that with writing. So Roxanne, I've been doing a bunch of writing, and so we've been heads down with that. And I'll be often on the weekends clicking away, sitting in a chair, looking out our big windows, and pop my head up, and all of a sudden it's 2 or 3 hours later. And I think that the joy at work and this idea of being in a flow state are related, and so it feels like we're able to slip into those things, and that's been great. And maybe a little bit of pandemic driven because we're hanging out at home a lot, so it's been great to be able to find something that generates that level of joy, and provides a bunch of fulfillment too. So I really love all of that. All right, well, we got people joined from all over the place, so I think maybe we're ready to get rolling.
Okay.
Awesome. All right, so today what we want to do, we have this broader idea around assessing stakeholders, but we wanted to focus a little bit and use this idea of managing the change impact in a post-pandemic world. So hopefully that's not too premature to start using the words post-pandemic world, but it does feel like things are better. And so we wanted to set this up as our topic, just to help us focus in a bit on what we will be doing here. And so we will be talking about stakeholders, but this is going to be what wraps around us. And this fits in with our set of various webinars that we've been doing. And the one you can see here is part of our Change Leadership series, which is on the right-hand side. And we've been doing these now every month, and usually in the latter part of the month. And we have a Change Analytics series that we're doing. You can see those on the left-hand side in the beginning of the month. And so we're running through these for the first half of our year, and then we make updates based on what we hear from you guys, and we'll roll them back in for the second part of the year. So looking forward very much to be able to take these kinds of things on and be able to share them with you. But this really gets into the heart right here with this quote. And we highlighted a couple parts of it from Dr. Martin Seligman, who's really the founder of positive psychology. Although Roxanne and I both realized today that he actually credits his 5-year-old daughter. So if you want to know about that, you should probably listen to the podcast, because it's really interesting to hear how he thinks about it, just his revelation from that. Which is amazing. But just look at these 2 yellow quotes. The data are that being cheerful and merry doesn't do anything at all. It's being optimistic and hopeful that's going to be impactful here. And then after the pandemic, and as it ends, it's hope and optimism. They're going to predict the recovery, leadership, and our future. And he's really talking about what do leaders need to do in order to be successful as leaders within their organization in order to be able to drive from here. And that really spoke to us. And so we wanted to start with that with you guys.
Yeah. And, I really feel like this is useful now, obviously, but I think it's useful in a change context too. I was thinking about what he said in the podcast about learned helplessness and how you hear in the podcast that he learns that he was wrong. His initial research was wrong, or this initial hypothesis was wrong. And that we start off as our sort of default is helplessness. And you have to sort of learn or become aware or become hopeful in order to feel something different. The idea of mastery, right? And I feel like that really connects for me for change, especially because when you are changing, you're disrupting, right? You're disrupting the flow of what people are doing, right? When they're not changing, they're sort of just optimizing their work, right? And then you introduce a change and then they can't be optimized. They have, focus on optimizing. They have to focus on, okay, what do you need me to do differently? What are the implications of this for me? And, the world I work in. And so if we can, I think as leaders and as change professionals, because I think we have both on the line here, show people that there is hope. This notion of a quick win, which we often use when we're trying to do change, is a way to kind of put some hope in the situation, help people feel like, oh, well, we can succeed with this change. It isn't that overwhelming. I think when I think of quick win, I connect it to what he said in there about what he's learned helplessness. But then I think that's really interesting. And of course, just the idea of hope and optimism really speaks to me anyway.
Yeah, so I've put in the link to his podcast, or the podcast that he was on, speaking of psychology. So if you guys get a chance, go take a look, take a listen to that, because I think it's really good.
Yeah, so just kind of building on this, we think of the change leader's role is to create the conditions that make it easier for people to change, to do things in a new way that will achieve the value of the change, right? So there are a lot of great ways leaders do this, right? Some very simple ways, well, sometimes simple, sometimes not, being clear about what the change is, being clear about what the expectations are, actually modeling the change that you want others to, adopt is a way to make it easier. Removing obstacles, reinforcing progress, all of those good change kinds of things are the ways that leaders create the conditions to make it easier. The other way they do that is by tuning into how people are impacted, which is what we're going to really focus on in this conversation. So here we're going to cover three things. We're going to first talk about tuning in, where are your folks today? And then understanding the impact of the change, and then setting an intention for how you want them to experience the change process, not the change itself, but the change process. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is what we're going to cover. The tuning in part is really understanding where people are. So this is something that we use a lot with people we work with, this idea of our brains being focused on three basic areas. Employees are like this, teams are like this. They're focused on the work itself, or internal strife, which is about workplace politics and conflict and self-protection, right? And then there's the external forces. Certainly the pandemic has been an external force on the workforce. And so the idea is to consider, where are your people focused? When they're focused on internal strife and external forces, they can't focus so much on the work itself, right? The part that gives them joy, maybe, and achieving the goals of the company. So this is useful for you to kind of look at and see, where do I think my people are? And then with the pandemic, there have been some things that people have had to think about that have been unusual. So there's some decision fatigue with this, right? Well, it's been all kinds of things as relates to working from the office. Also, lots of things related to the vaccine has been a big topic of conversation and decisions that people don't have necessarily have to make as it relates to work. And then this last one, do I even like my job? What options do I have to make a career move? That has certainly been a hot topic. I'm wondering, this decision making is your area of expertise. Do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, the decision fatigue thing it's true. It's a biological problem, right? So as I'm sure all of you know, you make lots of decisions every single day. Some people would say hundreds of decisions, depending on how you count them every single day. But most of those you do with a heuristic. You have a shortcut, a rule. Nobody thinks through, all right, I'm brushing my teeth. I will start on the bottom left molar. I'll move over to the top of that, then to the inside. You don't do that, right? You would be exhausted if you had to go through and think your way through that. And that's true for lots and lots of decisions. But as we have to force, or because of the circumstances, we're forcing more and more decisions to be active processes like the ones that Roxanne just went through. And that is happening now. That is energy draining, right? It takes energy to go through that process to make the decision. All the emotional downside of that aside, just the actual doing the decision takes a lot of energy and can be fatiguing. Add into that the anxiety of a difficult situation, certainly with the pandemic, and then with the economic downturn, we've had significant racial problems that have gone on. You go on and on just in the last 24 months of what's happening. And now, just to say it, since we're sitting on it, we need to at least acknowledge it. This what's going to be a very difficult and already painful conflict that's occurring in the eastern part of Europe. That is the context in which all of these people are trying to do their work and just be humans. And that is massively fatiguing. And so something that we need to pay attention to when we're thinking about assessing stakeholders that are going to be going through any sort of a change. This is a significant area for us to be aware of.
Yeah, so as you may know, we focus on joy at work as part of the work we do. And this is how we basically think about it. We think of psychological safety, so making it so people can take that interpersonal risk, and over time building those trusting relationships, and ultimately getting to joy with that emotional connection. The thing that happens when you get to that joy state is that teams that experience that are able to not only bounce back from adversity, but they actually get stronger. We experienced this ourselves 10 years ago, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this construct is helpful, certainly in terms of work in general, but also in terms of change. So that's what this detailed text is sort of showing you. On that lowest layer, we think it's really important that you have psychological safety on the project team itself, right? The team that's running this change effort. Or the leadership team, right? If you have a situation where you don't have a leadership team that trusts each other, that leads to some very strange behavior and people self-protecting and the change not going as well. So when you are able to have that psychological safety on the team, it actually spills out to the people that are impacted by the change, and it can grow. So, as you know, we think of change, or I'm sure you think of change as an ecosystem where you have the people who are making the change happen, the people who are impacted by it, the stakeholders around them, potentially customers. It certainly goes, and certainly everyone involved can be impacted by this kind of a attitude. And so we think of cultivating joy as the words and actions that build trust, improve relationships, and create a thriving workforce. This is the part where you can really manage the internal strife better when you're working on this, and even help your team see external forces in a way that's more balanced. help them calm down and adapt so that they can, again, get back to the work itself. So that's tuning in. So let's talk about understanding the impact. So how are people impacted, and what would make it easier for people to change? So a change impact assessment is seeing the change through the eyes of our stakeholders. We know that the effectiveness of any change strategy depends largely on how well people are impacted by the change. So you do an impact assessment so that you can answer these questions. We're trying to get smarter about what do people need to do differently, how big a change is this for them, what is their expected reaction, right? The why behind all that. And that leads to smarter decisions about the best strategies. The other thing that it does is it demonstrates empathy for the workforce and invites them to engage. So depending on how you do it, you can, people can feel like, okay, you're paying attention to my perspective on this change. And we say that not to become paralyzed by it, because you have to make smart decisions about how you're going to move forward, right? You can't appease everyone, but the idea is to do what's reasonable. What is reasonable to help people move to adoption of the change that you're looking for?
Yeah, this was an idea that wasn't so obvious to me initially, that by actually going through the process, you're sending a signal. You're actually communicating to the people as you're interacting with them to get this information that something is up, that there is a change afoot, and that you're actually interested in what's going on to try and make good things happen for folks. And I think that is really powerful, and not something that I immediately connected to until Roxanne actually pointed it out to me. And so I offer that to you because maybe some of you haven't tuned into that, or you do this work and you think of that, yeah, that's obvious. Well, it may not be obvious to some of the people that you're working with.
Right. So one of the things, so I've been doing change work for a really long time, as I'm sure many of you have. One of the things I'm constantly trying to do is figure out how to boil this down to make it really accessible, especially with the people I'm working with, especially people in leadership positions, because they may or may not understand the impact that they have, the influence they have. And so I want to help them see that. So I created a tool for change leaders called the Change Leader Impact Assessment. It's a very simple tool. It kind of goes hand in hand with whatever a change professional is doing, right? If you're doing a deeper assessment, you're doing something more thorough, if you can give your leadership team a way to see what's happening too, they are poised to have better conversations with you about what's happening, how people are progressing or not, the risk that you're seeing, and then what you can do reasonably to make it easier for people to change. And then this is another way to help a leader build trust with people over time, because they are tuning in. And it's very simple. As I said, it's these questions, right? What do they need to do differently from their perspective? How big a change is it? What is their expected reaction and why? So what do you think how do you think they're going to respond, and why do you think that? Number 4 is kind of different. It's what changes are in recent memory and how did it go? This is a very important one because there's a hangover from what happened recently. What would successful transition look like for them, and what would make it easier? These are very simple questions, but it's amazing how much insight can come from them. And it's amazing how we don't really ask these questions, right? At least not explicitly. And the other thing is, while this may be obvious to you in a non-stressful situation, when you're in the stress of leading change, this kind of thing is a good reminder of, okay, this is how I need to start to think about it.
Yeah, when I encountered these, they were a revelation to me. And I would have considered myself a pretty empathetic leader before, and interested in paying attention to my team. My first role as an adult was as a naval officer, and I people that I had to take care of, and I took that responsibility really seriously. And so I was a little taken aback when I realized I didn't actually think about some of these things when we were introducing a change. Maybe part of it maybe on the number 2, how big is the change? I'm like, it doesn't matter. We just got to go take this on. And, there's some goodness to that sort of approach. Yeah, we can go do it, but clearly missing some things as well. If you just sort of blow through that and you're not paying attention to what does it mean for everybody else. So again, I offer that to you for folks that do this change work. It may not be so obvious to the people you're working with that to think about these questions. And for those of you that are leading teams, to take these on. There can be really helpful to get an insight. Just take 5 minutes to think through these. You might get a very different perspective on what this is going to mean for your team.
Yeah, and that's the thing. As I said, I like to keep things really simple and make it accessible. And one of the things that we say is just take 10 minutes and answer these questions before you enter into a conversation, for example. It's really useful for that. And then the next thing that kind of goes with this is the change story tool, which is an excellent tool for aligning a team on the basics and what the messages are and what people need to know about this. It reduces the amount of time people need to spend interpreting when you can get this down on paper. The other thing is, when we go through this with a leadership team or any kind of team, project team, the assumptions come out, right, about why this is happening, the benefits, the how, et cetera, that it's really useful. It's really useful to hear what the assumptions are. So the reason why is those are the questions you're likely to get as you go out to communicate. And those are likely some of the rumors that might be out there. So this is a really nice companion with the change leaders impact assessment. So one of the things that we do with any team that we work with is we introduce them to these 2 tools. And when something happened a while back where we were visiting a client on site, this was a couple of years ago, and we were asking him how things were going with the team. He said, yeah, we're good. Every time we introduce a change, it's all change and impact assessments and change stories, impact assessments and change stories. And we were like, yes, we were really excited that landed, because we knew that if they had that kind of mentality, that their workforce was going to be in better shape, because the leaders were paying attention to this. Even just a little bit of paying attention to it in a deliberate way is very useful. And then this is a change leader's empathy cycle. So once you're poised to communicate as a leader, this is something that you can use to tune into how your message is landing. So understanding the impact, going back to the impact assessment questions, and then asking yourself, what do people need to know now? How will they react ideally? What would most help them to react ideally? In other words, what information do they need? So, that would help that outcome happen. And then communicating. So communicating, what do I need to share with them now? What can I share with them now? What would help them for me to acknowledge that I don't know yet, but will commit to sharing in the future? And then once you communicate, seek reactions. What reactions were as expected and which were you surprised by? What do you need to investigate a little bit more? And that tells you a little bit more about how people feel they're impacted. This is, again, a useful tool to help you kind of, as a leader, understand what do I need to communicate and how is it landing, and always kind of tuning in. And it, again, sets up for useful conversations with your peers or your leadership team or the program team about what you're seeing and what you're noticing, and then what you need to do to mitigate risk or reinforce progress. So again, just a simple tool. And then the last thing I would say about empathy in practice, one of the things that people worry about is, well, I don't know the answers to these questions. I don't know how they're going to react. I'm not them. Totally get that. That's true. The point is to try, right? This is what we call empathy in practice, right? To try to understand their point of view And also know that because you're not them, you won't necessarily get it right. But starting from that point completely changes how you interact with them. That's really the point. If you're making assumptions about, people won't change or whatever it is, that sort of puts up a wall. Whereas you could introduce, you could start to talk about it in a conversation by saying something like, I think this is the way you're impacted by this change, but I'm not sure I've gotten that right. So can you help me understand, is that right? And what else would you like me to know? So again, it's just a different kind of way to enter into the conversation.
Yeah, I think the idea of trying to put yourself in their place is one that takes a little bit of time, right? So you got to actually pause for a second to go do it. And I can certainly relate to the always being run, run, run. I haven't got time for that. I've also been one of those people, I will admit, that has been in the, just shut up and go do your work. And I haven't got time to figure out why this is impacting you. But the value of that is really high. And so being able to take a pause or even just a slow down in order to contemplate it a bit, ask those 6 questions, walk through the basics of the change story, and try and understand what it means for the people that are being impacted here. Maybe that sounds really obvious as we're saying it now. It can be very difficult to pull your head up and go do it when you're in the middle of trying to make something happen.
Yeah. Everybody is very busy. So naturally, they will forget. Takes a while for it to become second nature. So then the third thing that we want to touch on is setting an intention. And this is how we want people to feel about the change process and what would help them feel that way. Now, I'm talking about the change process and not about the change. We think of them as completely separate things. People may not like the change, but if you handle the change in the right way or with an intention, maybe is a better way of putting it, it can be fine, right? It can be, people can adapt, and even with something they don't necessarily like. So these are the 2 questions that we present to people is, how do I want everyone to experience the change process, and what would help them feel that way? And so we've turned that into a tool as well. And so when a leader clarifies this intention, what it does is it guides their words and actions, and then it guides the words and actions of the entire program, like how it's carried out. So this is, we feel, an important step to get to joy is to talk about this, right? And I know that we did this 10 years ago.
10 years ago. Actually, Roxanne produced proof, a printout of an email when she did this with me 10 years ago, almost literally. So September of 2012, and took me through this exercise. This is the first time I'd ever done it. And she asked me questions that I had to really think about. Like, I just hadn't contemplated them before. How did I want this change? And we're leading a very big program at the time. How did I want that to be for the people that I was going to land with? And I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. I had to actually think about it and think about all the years before then where I'd done these larger efforts and big projects, and it just kind of, burrowed my way through them to go make them happen. Right. And now we're trying to be in a very different place and set an intention. We'll tell you a little more about the outcome of that, but that was the beginning of a transformative process to take a program that was struggling and make it a significant success. And it really began with that idea, actually going through this and setting an intention.
Yeah, and there's a process that we use to do this where we focus on what the leader is looking for, and then we talk to the people who have to, participate in order to make it happen, so that they together can be guided by this intention to get to a change that is carried out in a particular kind of way. And the other thing that's really valuable about setting an intention is you can measure it, right? So once you know what you are intending, like how you want people to experience the change, then you can ask yourself, well, what are the signs that that's happening? How will I know people are experiencing the change the way I intend? When you start to write down the signs, these are the signs that I'm looking for, then you have the start of a measurement plan, really. So you can figure out how that shows up in different ways, maybe some observable things you can notice, maybe some hard metrics that the company already produces, maybe surveys, right? You go out and ask people, to self-report, right? We typically do that with change projects, but you can also observe and look at the metrics that are already in place. That gives you some really good intel about, hey, is this working? The other thing is, and this kind of goes back to Dr. Seligman, this keeps you out of the typical ways of thinking about change, right? Oftentimes people assume it's hopeless. People hate change. They don't like it. They won't like this change, or people don't change. I love that one. We know that's not true, right? Certainly after the pandemic, we know that's not true. But when we think this way, there's little chance that people's behavior will be seen in any other way, right? So it goes back to this whole helplessness thing. When you have an intention and you're clear about it and you ask yourselves, are these words, are these actions in line with the intention I have for how I want people to experience it? That shifts it. It shifts it just a little bit. That little bit makes a huge difference. We have certainly experienced that many times.
Yeah, this is big stuff, I think, really. This is self-defeating kind of a setup, and getting out of that is immensely powerful. So just as Roxanne was saying, if we're going to expect these kinds of things, then that's what we're going to get.
Absolutely.
And if you can expect something else, then you'll get something else. And all of you have certainly experienced that, right? Both ways, right? If you have a positive, optimistic outlook, you have a better shot that other people will. If you start off, a leader in particular starts off and saying, hey, my people don't change, they all hate it, and they're going to resist it. Well, they certainly will. Like you will absolutely find that happen, because you're looking for it, expecting it, and as a leader, communicating that's the expectation. I've heard leaders say, I know you guys aren't going to like this change. I'm like, oh my goodness, if you start off with that, of course, that is where they're going to go. And so this is not just a little voodoo smoke and mirrors. This is really about how do you set the atmosphere to create a culture that is going to be able to do something important. That culture is something that we call joy at work. And so this is really important in order to be able to get to that place.
Yeah. And the other thing that I like about what Dr. Seligman talked about is it's not about being merry and cheerful. That's not it, right? You have to work with what's there, which is partially why we started in the tune into where your people are in this conversation, because you have to work with what's there. But don't become paralyzed by it. Figure out what you want your intention to be, and then stick to it, right? Stick to how can I just make an adjustment so I'm more likely to get that experience for them. And this is one of the things that we say all the time. People are not usually upset by what is changing. People get upset by how change is handled. Most people understand that companies have to change. That's the reality of business. A lot of things that have to happen. You may or may not like the decision, but most people understand that companies have to change. It's how it's handled that makes the biggest difference. Do people feel respected in the process? Do they feel everyone has been respected in the process? That's a big question that people will have in the back of their minds and evaluate all the time, whether they say it or not. So this is something really to have in mind. And so we've been alluding to our own experience. We experienced this 10 years ago when we were part of a program that was in the pit of despair, as we like to say, 18 months in, and we set a different intention. We used this exercise to set an intention, and it shifted everything. So we went from the disappointment to the biggest success in this part of the company. And so it was an amazing, joyful experience. And from that point on, we have been trying to figure out, okay, what happened and how can we reproduce it so that we can do it again and others can do it again.
And I think what's really important about this story is the work that we were doing was difficult, and the work itself did not get better. So we're putting software in, and I was on the phone with the software vendor every single day at 5 p.m. to talk to them about what were they going to do about these defects and how do we have more defects show up. We're wrestling this thing into place. The difficulty of the project itself never improved, but the attitude of the team improved dramatically.
Right.
So it really was about setting a different intention for it all. And it did not turn everything into sunshine and lollipops. And even with the rollout of it, the difficulty of the rollout itself had people in the office working at 5 a.m. to go handle the startup of some of this work, and in the office late at night from 8 p.m., sometimes until 1 or 2 a.m. in order to get it put into place. So, and that lasted for 6 months. So at no point was this, oh yeah, that was easy. It was hard the entire time. But the attitude of the team, as you can see from some of these photos, changed dramatically.
Yeah.
And so it really was a inspirational moment for Roxanne and I. And I think it is for many of the people that were here, because they even now 10 years later still refer back to it when we see them. So it was certainly a turning point for them as they thought about, well, how could work be? It could be significantly different.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you would read your intention.
Yeah. So I put together, it ended up being 5 statements. And what I said was, we will successfully achieve our goals when, 1, we speak openly and solve problems collaboratively during our Friday program leads meeting. 2, our sentences about the program are in first person plural and not first person singular and third person plural. That was from my 8th grade English teacher. 3, as a group, we clearly lay out the needs of the program for the executives and get action on those needs when we need their help. 4, we consistently state the same goals and empower the team to act those goals with autonomy. And lastly, we celebrate success in such a way that the atmosphere and mood of the team improve with every step and every milestone achieved. And what I thought was fascinating about that is Roxanne shared that with my leadership team, and they said,
we want the same thing,
which is not at all what I thought.
And they were surprised by your statement too, right? So just to touch on the process, I first interviewed Ed and I asked him these questions about his intent. And then we created the statement that he just read to you. And I asked him, would it be okay for me to share this with your team? And he said yes. So polished up some of the snarkiness,
my vulgar language got cleaned up.
So it was, ready to share. And then I met individually with each leader on the team and asked them the same questions. And then when it got to the point of asking the question, well, what would success look like? I shared the vision that Ed had put together and then asked them some questions about their reaction to it. And it was great. I mean, it was very surprising for folks. And we got together and we looked at it in all the feedback in aggregate. I still have all of that as well. And it was like something shifted and it just changed everything. And so it, like you said, never got easier in terms of the work, but it absolutely got easier in terms of our ability to bounce back from any adversity. And those bad things kept happening on the project, but the team was the one that was the strategic advantage in that situation.
Right.
So so that is what we wanted to share with you. So our big takeaways are this: think about how you think about people will impact how well the change goes. So if you think that they won't change, then they probably won't. If you think that change is hard, then it is, right? Especially as a leader, this is what you say and what you think will be projected out in your words and actions. They'll just come out. And that reminds me, I did have to remind Ed, hey, that's not what you're saying there, and what you're doing there isn't in keeping with your intention. So, because he wasn't going to get the outcome he was looking for if he continued to do the things that he was doing. Second thing is ask questions about the impact of stakeholders, right? So use those questions, and then decide how you want people to experience the change process. If you do those things, if you think about those things, then you're much likely to get a better outcome and potentially a joy at work outcome.
All right. So as we mentioned at the beginning, we have a series that we're doing. And so next month, we'll be talking about meaningful metrics. And then later on in that month, how to grow joy at work. So really continuing an expansion of this theme. So now that you know information about your stakeholders, what are you going to go do with it to be able to actually make something happen, which is, part of our founding story as well, and part of what we've continued to explore since then. And Roxanne and I have been doing research around this. And I'm actually super excited because I've got some research assistants coming from the University of Richmond to help out with us. So we've got a whole bunch of interviews that we've done. You can see that we have an ebook that we have put out, a guide to joy at work that you can get on all the regular outlets, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and the rest that have the initial findings that we put together so far, and are continuing to do more work around all of that. I'm very excited now to be getting some undergrads to help me out with that so that we can process some of these interviews that Roxanne and I've been doing.
And let me just say, there's so much interest.
Yeah.
Put something out there about, hey, we're doing this joy at work research. I mean, it's amazing the interest that we had. I mean, if you think about it, someone in college thinking about doing this kind of research, especially from the psych department, they're all over it. But it's nice to get that kind of response
from those business students. So they want in too. So that's pretty great. And we have a few events coming up as well. And so what we have pulled together and are starting to do are these Joy Labs. And you see a couple of dates there. I put a link in the chat for you so you can grab that and take a look at what is going on with those. But we would invite you to take a look at that. And it's really a next step for us. It's how do we continue this kind of conversation, exploration going. We'll share some of the things that we've learned, but also look for engaging with all of you or any of you who would come and hang out with us on what this means for you. And so you can see a couple of our topics here: understanding a change impact coming up on March 8th, and feedback and motivation on March 17th.
Yeah, and I just want to say, Ed shared the link to a web page. Our website is in the process of being redone, so you're kind of getting a preview of it. So please forgive any kind of wonkiness there.
And then lastly, Change and Joy in the Workplace is our flagship change management class. That's the certification class for change professionals that are looking to become a certified change management professional, CCNP, take the exam to get there. Our next session for that starts, as you can see, on April 12th, and always interested to get as eclectic a group of people in there as we possibly can, because that makes it way more fun to be able to do that. So you can see that on our website as well. So check that out. And then a whole bunch of other stuff that we are doing through ACNP. So at the conference coming up at the end of June, Roxanne and I will be doing a masterclass on change analytics. And we have 2 conference sessions, one on calculating a change ROI and one on artificial intelligence and change management. So if you're interested, please take a look at those. And then we'll actually tell the story in much more detail that we just barely touched on here at the ACNP webinar on August 9th. So it's okay to be in the pit, just don't decorate. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what we did to get ourselves out of there and make it all better. So thank you guys for spending your time with us. I know we just have a minute or so left, but if folks have questions and want to throw them in the chat. We would love to hear what you're thinking. When we do that, I'll just point out, this is just a bunch of ways to connect with us, both our website. Roxanne and I are doing a pretty prolific amount of writing, and so you can catch us either on Medium or on our blog. So check that out. We are trying to keep up with that. So as we're learning new things, either in the Joy research or with the work that we're doing, to be able to put that out. And as you probably noticed, we have an analytics bent as well as our Joy at Work bent. And so creating tools and trying to pull all of that out as well. And so I'm really excited to get a chance to be able to share that with people, because we want to make a difference, and hopefully that becomes useful for all of you as well.
Well, thanks everyone. And Tom, I don't know if you're still out there. Thanks for the shout out on the program. Tom Anderson was on the program that we were talking about. He was one of the leaders.
Yes, so great to see Tom in here. Yeah. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you next month.